Joining us, MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and host of FP Live, Ravi Agrawal, and retired four-star general and MS Now military analyst General Barry McCaffrey. Interesting to see so many Republican lawmakers today, Michael, saying that they're concerned and they need more answers out of the Pentagon.
Yeah, Katie, and notably, it's the bipartisan lawmakers, including those Republicans, from a pair of key committees, both the House Armed Services Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, the top Republican and Democrat on both of those panels, coming out with statements after that Washington Post story published, saying they are demanding oversight of what had happened in the Caribbean. I want to read to you some of their statements because I think that they really are powerful. First, for the House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mike Rogers and Ranking Member Adam Smith, they said the committee is committed to providing rigorous oversight of the Department of Defense's military operations in the Caribbean. Senator Roger Wicker, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and Senator Jack Reed, he's the ranking member of that panel, issuing a similar statement saying, quote, the committee is aware of the recent reports regarding the follow-on strikes on suspected narcotics vehicles. They say the committee has directed inquiries to the department and we will be conducting vigorous oversight to determine the facts related to the circumstances. So, Katie, leaving no question there that these four key lawmakers, again, they are in charge of the committee that oversees the armed services, are very concerned by these reports of those boat strikes, and they are efforting more information and investigations right now.
So what authority do they have to get more information? I mean, if they ask the Pentagon for more information, are they going to get it? Michael.
Oh, right. Well, these committees, they have subpoena power for the majority of the committees, and they can subpoena information. They can threaten to bring some of these officials in front of the panels to ask them questions under oath. They could write letters requesting more information. There are a lot of different avenues that these panels can take. Members of Congress are returning back into the Capitol today after taking that Thanksgiving recess off, and we know that this report came out during that Thanksgiving recess. So our team will be asking these four members of Congress and others what avenues they can take and what recourse there is to find answers. Because it's not just these four, it's those members you played in the introduction. There's a lot of concern on both sides of the aisle, and these panels are committing to finding the information.
General McCaffrey, if they wanted more information, what sort of logs does the Pentagon have? Verbal logs, audio logs, recordings? Would there be a verbal or a log of Pete Hegseth's verbal order to kill everybody? What information could they access?
Well, 100% for sure, there is a record of who said what when. We have to assume there will be an investigation, hopefully in the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Roger Wicker and Jack Reed, to get at the bottom of this. But look, the bottom line is the alleged incident of killing the last two survivors was quite clearly an illegal order. Quite clearly a war crime if it occurred the way we're being told. That admiral who accepted the verbal order from Secretary Hegseth will also be held responsible for passing it on. So they've got to get to the bottom of this. We simply can't have the equivalent of a Nazi submarine in World War II machine gunning the survivors of a torpedoed ship. That's the equivalent statement. But, Katie, the big problem is, where is Congress, Article 1, use of force? What are we trying to achieve in Venezuela? It's clearly not a counter-drug operation. There's 15,000 of the most sophisticated troops and naval vessels and aircraft and the U.S. inventory down there, entirely unsuited for anything except destroying an enemy armed force. So Congress must get involved. This is completely out of control.
Here is Caroline Leavitt, a little bit, just a moment ago, in fact, at the White House briefing, talking about this reporting and the strikes.
President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated. And I would just add one more point to remind the American public why these lethal strikes are taking place. Because this administration has designated these narco-terrorists as foreign terrorist organizations. The president has a right to take them out if they are threatening the United States of America and if they are bringing illegal narcotics that are killing our citizens at a record rate, which is what they are doing.
So General, I know we just talked about this, but again, I just want to go over it one more time. Can you help me understand the line? If they are striking a drug boat and the strike does not kill everybody, which, you know, it's a lethal strike, so surprising it would not kill everybody, but it does not kill everybody, why is it then crossing a line to continue on with a second strike?
Well, look, if it was a ground combat situation, it'd be far more complicated. And there is no requirement for imminent threat in these close combat situations. For example, we strike retreating enemy forces, or we strike their logistics far behind the line. But in the case of a naval engagement, even if you assume that there is an appropriate legal mechanism citing these people as terrorist states and therefore allowing the armed forces instead of the Coast Guard and the DEA to deal with them, even if you buy that, once at sea, they're helpless, they're assumed to be no threat, they have submitted, then it's quite directly in the DOD manual that you can't go on to kill them, which makes sense. And why wouldn't a helicopter have gone in and picked them up and had them as prisoners and interrogated them as a follow-on? So I think what has happened is the armed forces figured this out, and they're no longer accepting this kind of directive from the Secretary of Defense, who should be investigated. And if he did give a verbal order to that effect, I would suggest the Senate should take him out of office.
So, Ravi, how is this reverberating beyond the borders of the United States? There's obviously some deep discomfort and some concern in Washington. Certainly, a lot of deep discomfort and concern amongst the American public. What about outside of this?
Oh, there's even more discomfort abroad. I mean, the United Kingdom has reportedly stopped sharing some intelligence with the United States. Remember, they're real allies on the Five Eyes alliance. And the United Kingdom has, partly because of the Commonwealth and other countries that sort of it governs, it gets a lot of intelligence across the Caribbean. The Netherlands also reportedly is uncomfortable sharing intel around the region with the United States if it thinks, as it does, that these strikes could well be illegal, or at the very least, the United States has not been sharing enough information about how these people might be narco-terrorists, what kind of imminent threat they pose to the United States, and why indeed this is a focus at all. And if you zoom out a little bit more, I think we shouldn't forget, amid this very important issue, that with this huge array of U.S. force outside the coast of Venezuela, as much as a third of the U.S. Navy, if the United States is pushing for regime change in Venezuela, which could lead to all kinds of instability in Venezuela and across the region, of course, that would have huge repercussions around the region, for the world, but also spare thought for Trump's own supporters, who do not understand the consistency here, how this adds up to a foreign policy in the administration that has really, so far, been about not getting entangled in foreign affairs, not focusing mostly on peace agreements rather than starting new wars. How this fits into that is very confusing.
I think there would be some understanding if there was a strategy to stop illegal drugs from coming into this country, broadly speaking, but they have not, beyond just saying they're narco-terrorists, they haven't really shown why this would stop the flow of drugs into this country. On that same point, make a real dent in the flow of drugs. On that same point, the president is also saying he's going to pardon a narco-terrorist, somebody convicted of drug trafficking here in the United States. The former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, convicted and sentenced to 45 years in jail for trafficking, dozens of tons of cocaine into the United States over many, many years, and allowing Honduras to be a conduit for that drug trafficking, even accused of working with El Chapo. I don't understand how, on the one hand, the administration is striking boats, accusing them of being narco-terrorists, and on the other, pardoning this man.
Neither do I. It just doesn't add up. The contradictions keep adding up, in fact. Look, and Venezuela also isn't a huge supplier of drugs into the United States. There are other countries you could look at, you could focus at. There is more evidence you could turn up. And of course, this call to pardon the former Honduran president makes no sense at all. But I think, again, if you zoom out here, it seems that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has long talked about regime change in Venezuela and also in Cuba, of course, that this faction within the White House might be winning out so far in trying to convince the president to take action, even though that goes quite against all of the things Trump has talked about on the campaign trail while in office. A lot of the MAGA support base does not want foreign entanglements for the United States. So it'll be very interesting to see whether Trump actually goes for the kill here. But the other thing is that in putting so much of the naval forces off the coast of Venezuela, the United States may have worked itself into a corner here, because if you back off now without actually taking action, where that leaves Maduro is in a much stronger position, where he's able to tell his people that he stood up to the full might of the United States, the most powerful country in the world. And so there's a real dilemma now that confronts Trump, and it'll be very interesting to see how he games that out.
The collapse of the strongman illusion. Trump's political identity was built on one myth. He was the strongman who could bend outcomes, intimidate rivals, and dominate negotiations. His supporters believed it. His opponents feared it. The media amplified it. But the illusion only works as long as the world reacts with fear. Once that reaction fades, the entire myth collapses, and that is precisely what is happening. The collapse began quietly when diplomats began ignoring his threats and waiting for policy clarifications that never came. When governors publicly challenged him without consequence. When military advisors corrected him. When judges overturned his orders. A real strongman commands institutions. Trump merely argues with them. A real strongman shapes outcomes. Trump complains about them. His power was always theatrical, not structural. Foreign governments understood this sooner than Americans did. They realized that Trump's aggression is not backed by a consistent doctrine or long-term strategy. Retaliation no longer intimidates him. It confuses him. Non-cooperation doesn't provoke decisive action. It produces contradictory reactions. The world stopped playing his game when it saw the game wasn't real. And when fear disappears, strength becomes performance. The strongest proof of the illusion's collapse is internal. His own party, once enabling every impulse, now treats him like a risk to be managed rather than a leader to be followed. Advisors leak against him. Allies negotiate behind his back. Donors hedge their bets. Institutions brace for the next outburst. No one behaves this way towards a strong man. They behave this way towards a liability. The collapse is psychological as well. Trump once acted like a man, forcing the world to adapt to him. Now he acts like a man reacting to a world that refuses to adapt. The shift is subtle, but fatal. His anger feels less like dominance and more like frustration. His attacks feel less strategic and more frantic. His defiance looks less heroic and more desperate. Strongmen don't explain themselves. They impose themselves. Trump now spends more time insisting he is winning than actually winning. At its core, the strongman persona collapses when outcomes contradict the image. Tariffs fail. Threats fizzle. Negotiations crumble. Allies defect. Rivals strengthen. Every one of these failures chips away at the mythology until only the performance remains. Trump still plays the role flawlessly. The raised voice, the confidence, the defiance. But the audience is no longer impressed. They've seen the strings behind the puppet. A strongman without real control is not a leader. He's an actor, trapped in a role that reality no longer supports. The costume is still there, but the power it once represented has faded.